Well, here we go. Carrie, thank you for sharing some time. I'll introduce my next guest. She is a woman who is one of the most inspirational and courageous people that I've ever met. And I got to meet her a couple years ago when I came out to Florida. And your life and the way that you conduct yourself was how I first saw that evidence of the life and beauty of the gospel. And as we got to know each other, I saw faith and courage and hope in you that comes from a source that is not, it's not inside you. And so I wanted for quite a while, we talked about having this conversation, and we're finally here. So my next guest is Carrie Hoeh. Would you say hello to Carrie and welcome her to the show?
Thank you.
A couple episodes ago, I had a doctor on, and I have a hard time talking to doctors. And so I asked him if he was nervous, and he said yes. Just like so. And I said, well, I'm nervous too because I talk to doctors. So thank you for risking it and for saying yes. It is not easy to share our stories, and much less to do it on a platform like this. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to Carrie is you are one of those people who is not fighting for the opportunity to grab a mic. In fact, when I invited you to tell your story, you said, well, this will be really the first time that I've done this in this kind of platform. So thank you for, again, your courage and your faith. We're going to get into a couple different layers of your story and get to talk freely about that. But tonight we are going to touch on cerebral palsy and the challenges that you have been able to navigate, and that part of your story is going to be a part of it. As we talk about that, I'm mindful that there's people listening that don't know what that is, or they aren't familiar with that struggle. Would you just start out by giving us a little bit of background about cerebral palsy and help us understand that, and then we'll dive into your personal story.
Yeah, so basically, cerebral palsy is brain damage to the part of the brain that controls your movements. So basically, the messages that are going from your brain to the muscle are misfiring differently than someone without cerebral palsy or CP. So there can be a couple different types. There can be kinds where your body is more loose and you have low muscle tone, meaning like your arms and your legs can be jello. Or you can have spastic cerebral palsy, which is what I have, where your muscles tend to be more stiff and rigid and your movements look jerky. Or it can be a combination. You can have a combination of both low tone and high tone.
Yeah. That is a great picture, kind of at an academic level and so thank you for that. For you personally, what is your daily experience navigating that challenge? What does that look like today?
Yeah, so for me, that means I have spastic diplegia, which means everything below my waist is affected. So that means for me, my legs, everything, my muscles are tight. Things like walking and balance can be harder. I have lower stamina than someone who doesn't have CP. I will tend to lose my balance randomly, trip, fall. And it's just, my muscles are tight and I feel it. It's like a constant pull on your body. You can just feel it. It's like a toothache. It's always there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. That's going to set context for now as we go back in time, because this is not something that popped up a year ago or 2 years ago. And I won't give away your age, but less than 40, older than 20.
Yeah.
There you go. So there you go. So older than 20, less than 40, and your whole life, this has been the struggle. You have navigated and learned to overcome some pretty amazing obstacles. When did you first become aware, or when did your family really first become aware that cerebral palsy was going to be a part of the story?
Yeah, so that would just be taking it all the way back from the beginning. When I was born 3 months early. They had sprayed for bugs at my mom's work, and that night she got really sick from the spray that they had used, and she went into labor. And so the closest hospital that could handle premature births at the time was in Tampa. So that, at the time, they were living in Sarasota, which is about an hour and a half south of Tampa, where we are currently. And so they get to the hospital, they say, okay, we're going to do what we can, but in 48 hours, something is going to happen. Well, 48 hours, I show up, They said, okay, you know, you got 20% chance of survival. We're not sure she's going to make it through the night. You know, just hope for the best and pray, and what happens, happens. So I was born. 3 days later, I'm doing well enough to be transferred to a less intensive unit in Sarasota. So that's definitely the power of God.
Yeah. 3 months early.
Yeah.
And what was your birth weight again?
So I was just over 2 pounds.
Okay. So you're right. 2 pounds within days, you're in a
Yeah.
less intense hospital. They're caring for you, but at this point, there's really not a diagnosis per
Yeah.
se. Remind me again, is it more like when you were 1, 2 years old that became part of the conversation?
Yeah, so you know, when your babies are premature, doctors always like, you know, don't compare them to other babies. They're developmentally, you know, things are going to develop a little slower. So the doctor had constantly said that, you know, pretty much my whole year. And then right around my first birthday, I still wasn't meeting my milestones, like rolling over, sitting up. So the doctor goes, you know, I think she might have cerebral palsy. So they took me to a neurologist, did the CT scans, and came up that I had cerebral palsy.
Yeah. When did you first have an awareness that there were limitations or there were struggles there physically that you were starting to become aware of? How old were you?
No, I think I was probably around 5 or 6, and just being like in the neighborhood, playing with kids and not being able to keep up and wanting my body to move fast, but the more that I wanted my body to move fast, the slower it would be, and just like tripping over things and just feeling frustrated. And I mean, for a kid, like your biggest independence is being able to ride a bike and not being able to have that freedom to be able to go outside with my friends. I mean, I would go outside, but it could at times be disheartening. You see your friends out there riding bikes and scooters, and you're kind of just out there, you know, walking along, doing your thing.
Yeah.
That's when I first started noticing the difference.
Sure. Was faith an active part of your family's story? We're going to kind of plot two stories,
Yeah.
two storylines at the same time. Was that a part of your life as well at this time, or was that kind of on the back burner, not a part of your story?
I mean, I'd grown up like going to church, but it was just kind of like what we did. It wasn't really like ingrained into our everyday life. It was just kind of like a ritual. It's what you did on Sundays.
Yeah. As you encountered some of the struggles, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, but one of those was just the power of words and navigating not just the physical struggle, but some of the emotional struggles that came. At a young age, were you frustrated, and was it hard? And I'm asking because when I met Carrie, she has a more positive and hopeful and courageous outlook on her days than I do on my Mondays or Tuesdays. And it's always just inspired me. Were you always like that? Was that just you from day one?
I mean, I think maybe more so ingrained in my personality of kind of like just overcoming and determined, like you're telling me I can't do something, okay, I'm gonna set out to prove you wrong. But I mean, there's definitely days where it's a struggle.
Yeah. Let's talk about the power of words, because one of the things that you encountered early on is having a different physicality in your motions and things that you're noticing, other kids are noticing. How did that relationship impact you? What were some of the things that were being said, and then how did you at a young age learn to navigate those?
You know, just naturally, kids would come up to me and be like, so what's wrong with your legs, or why do you walk like that, or why do you stand like that? And sometimes even adults would be like, you look like you're a retard, or don't stand like that, don't look like that. And I mean, there's power in life and death in the tongue. And I feel like I kind of didn't know how to be empowered to use my voice to express myself. So a lot of the things that were said to me, I would just kind of push it down and pretend I didn't hear what they said, or just kind of brush it off. Like in school, kids would come up to me and make noises, like as someone who is nonverbal, like just come up to my face and do that. Or they would be like, was your mom on drugs? And I would just try to like laugh it off or change the subject. So it could be hurtful.
Yeah. That level of callousness and just thoughtlessness that people are reacting out of their own brokenness, out of their own ignorance, but it has an impact. And as you said, God was with you early on when you were unaware of this. But as you told me the story, this is one of the things that jumped out at me. And I just thought, every day having to navigate those kind of voices, telling you one thing about who you are, your identity, the attitude that you're engaging the world, it would just shift. And yet yours seems to, as you've told the story, just stay focused. If you could go back and give yourself just one piece of advice, or maybe for somebody who's helping somebody at a younger age, a teacher or a parent who has the opportunity to encourage or be in the life of somebody who is in your shoes at that age, what piece of advice would you give to not only the person themselves? You said at the time you didn't feel like you had a voice.
Yeah.
So maybe what advice would you give yourself first?
I would say, use your voice. It's strong, it's powerful. You're empowered. You can share as much as you want about your story. You can share as little as you want about your story. But you have a voice. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself.
Do you feel like as people got to know you and got to know your story, were you able to watch some people change from the posture where they were because of fear or just ignorance, again, that there was some distance and some us versus them type of stuff? But as they got to know your story, were you able to see some people change and become friends or allies?
Yeah, I think a lot of the misconception is like they're not sure. It's different to them, so that's why they're acting like that. But I think once people got to know me, they started to see that, oh yeah, she might walk different and maybe stands a little different, but she likes the same things that I do. We like the same music or the same TV shows, or, her body physically may look different, but her mind is there.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so grateful that you took the time and are taking the time to share your story, because that idea that we are different, we need pioneering people to say, yes, we all are very different, and your story and my story may be very different, but if I don't know yours, if there's no opportunity for me to know you, then there will be fear and skepticism and mistrust. And so if we can empower each other, but also this younger generation, whatever our struggle is, to hear your voice and say, it is through people knowing who I am and what I'm walking through that it creates an opportunity for empathy on both sides. So thank you for leading us in that. I think that there's also something hopeful about this idea of the power of voice. I remember when you were telling me over lunch the story of being on the beach, and a different voice was spoken. So you have this narrative of why do you walk like that? Why do you stand like that? What's wrong? You had those voices, but occasionally there were the other powerful voices. Take us to that moment on the beach where you heard somebody say something that almost surprised you.
So literally, a group of friends and I were in the water, and they're like, oh, so it was maybe March or April, and they're like, so we're going to do a triathlon in July. Want to try? And I was like, whoa, like, what do you mean? I've never played sports or done dance, let alone do a triathlon, sports at a kid's level. How am I going to do a triathlon? And they were just like so encouraging from the get-go.
Yeah. How much did it mean to you that they didn't see any limitation? They just spoke, like you said, there's the power of life and death in our words. And they just said something that was without limitation that maybe you even had put on your mind. How meaningful was that?
That was like something that I'd never heard before. Like I never heard somebody say like, hey, try this, let's do it. It wasn't in my narrative, like in my environment growing up. It wasn't like, let's try this, It was always like, well, this is hard, or you might look different doing this, so we're gonna be standoffish and we're not gonna do this because, I don't want you to look different.
Yeah. It's one of those moments when we were talking over lunch that I just was like, yes. I can imagine that moment on the beach, these friends say, why don't you do a triathlon?
Yeah.
And you said to me that you had lived your whole life with people saying, careful about getting on the bike. Careful, because we don't want you, a lot of protection and concern, but also limitations. And these friends just said, like, we believe in you.
Yeah.
Do it. Yeah, that was encouraging to me. Just as a parent, sometimes I am too careful, too cautious, and and inside of you was this ferociousness that was like, let me at it, let me go. And you did,
Yeah.
right? And so now we can legitimately say, like, inspirational figure, powerful contributor to your community, woman of faith, and add to it triathlete, yeah? Because you went out and did it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you can clap to that.
Thank you.
How do you even do that? Because this is we're going to get into the surgery, and you went through a year ago, 2 days from now, you went through a incredible surgery. So we'll get to that. But this is pre-surgery, and pre-surgery CP, as you have said, it's CP. Carrie has told me that she would fall sometimes 3 and 4 times a day. Just a normal course of a day, going through her day because of the way that the function is, 3 and 4 times a day. That's a normal part of your daily experience. And while you're struggling with that, you're training for a triathlon. How does that even work?
It's just piece by piece. Like, if you look at it like, okay, it's a 400-meter swim and a 5-mile bike and a 2-mile walk, like that's overwhelming. Like, but if you just say, like, I'm going to start today, I'm going to do 5 laps in the pool, I'm going to walk a half mile, I'm going to, bike for a mile, and you just gradually, piece by piece, build up your endurance.
What did you start with? Did you start by segmenting it and saying, I'm going to master the bike and get that, or did you just take it all?
First it was like, it was even something as basic as like, okay, I'm going to stand at the wall in the pool, in the water, and I'm just going to kick my legs, because I hadn't been, I've been in the water and stuff, but being that physically active, like, I just had to kind of like retrain my brain, like, okay, this is how we do it. And I hadn't been on a bike or a trike since I was like 7 years old. So even something as simple as like, I could get my left foot to pedal, but my right foot I would go down and it just wouldn't turn all the way. So it was like someone had to take my foot and turn it. And it was like, okay, after a few minutes, it was like, oh, this is how we pedal. So when I say baby steps, it was literally baby steps.
I'm so, lit up by this, because when it's too hot outside, I quit. Like tonight, I almost quit the podcast because it was 9,000 degrees and we had to bring all this inside. That is a fight that I don't have. I have to work for that kind of fight, and I love it. You didn't just do that. We could talk all night about the athletic commitment, because you competed and you did it. You are a triathlete. You completed the triathlon. That's amazing. Yeah. That is not the only race, though. College was another thing that we just take for granted, these things that, I can just bike to class or walk to class. And any of our academic life, those are struggles. Sure, we have to follow our schedule, get up on time, pay the bill. There's a lot at that season of life. But you told me sometimes 2 hours it would take you to get to class.
On the bus, yeah. Because part of my cerebral palsy affects my vision. So it affects like my depth perception and reaction time. So because of that, I'm not able to drive a car. So what would take me 20, 25 minutes by car to get to campus would be 2 hours by bus, because our transportation here in the city is less than par, but that's a story for another time. But yeah.
We'll get into that later. Yeah. So when you went to college, you went to USF, right?
Yeah.
Did you dive in and have a vision for, I want this particular degree, or was it just the next thing and you went in and then discovered along the way, I have a passion for something, or what was that journey like?
For me, it was kind of like, I'm just going to start out with my prereqs. I didn't really know what I liked to do. I had, different electives you're required to take, and I took a journalism class, and I really liked the ability to be able to tell a story. And then from there, I just decided, communication was the path that I wanted to pursue.
What was the biggest obstacle that you faced in completing that? Because that race, the academic one, how long did that take? That was a part of your story for...
That was a good while. My family likes to joke. They're like, yeah, it took you 10 years to get a 4-year degree, but I did it.
I love it.
The hardest part was, yes, there's nothing wrong with my mind. I'm, very much intelligent and very much there, but just the effort that it takes to study and put things cohesively together is sometimes a little bit more of a struggle for me than someone
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us an example of just getting to class, like the idea of you had to take public transportation from the bus, you would get dropped off. Just take us, what are the struggles that we would not know about, that we would not understand that this was one day in going to class?
Okay, so yeah, if I'm walking to the bus stop, and sometimes, this community does stuff with the sidewalks, they're doing road repairs, and you're walking, and all of a sudden there's they're doing construction or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a pothole, and it's blocking me from using the rest of the sidewalk. So someone else would just step down and go about their day. Well, I can't just step off the curb, so I'd have to go back around or go and, just make a longer route for myself. Another thing too is if it's raining, I have to, I can't hold an umbrella and walk. I have to have my hands free. So that can be a struggle where you're just parking in your car and going to class. It's not that. It's the bus lets you off, and then you walk a good 10 minutes to your building,
Again, I just hear so many moments where I would give up, and you didn't give up. At what point in your story did your life and a faith that was not, just what we did, it wasn't the religious thing, but at what point in the story did faith, like a living, powerful faith, become a part of the story, and you discovered there is a power at work in me that is greater than these things that you started to draw from?
Yeah, so I was actually in college. I was at one of my internships at the time, and my supervisor, which is now a really good friend of mine, she was like, "Hey, why don't we, go to lunch? Tell me a little bit about your story, where you grew up." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I go to church, whatever, know God." And she's like, "No, do you really know God?" And she started. I would share with her some of my struggles and be like, sometimes life just sucks. Why is it like this? And she was like, and I'd get down on myself, but she's like, your identity is not in who the world says you are. It's God says He has a purpose and a plan for your life. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. All the days of His life are before Him, and you're here for a purpose. And I was like, whoa, when did they put that in there? Missed that.
Yeah,
know?
yeah. When we were talking about that at lunch, one of the things that hit me was, for all of us who are listening, the gospel is not, sometimes we forget how powerful it is, but when we have grown up with people telling us our limitations, telling us what is not true about us, trying to shape our identity with all of these words that they attach to us, this is your story, and you navigated with all that stuff gets put on us, and then somebody brings the gospel to you and says, but it says this, and it says this. And can you see how powerful? Can you imagine? Some of us have that story where this is the way the gospel sets us free and helps us reimagine our identity and the capacity that we have. We can never forget that. We can never forget it. What are some of the well, let me ask this first. Were you mad at God as you started to reconcile this? Okay, I'm hearing these truths, and these are beautiful truths, and at the same time, I'm still struggling, and I struggle. Did you ever have a moment where you had to reconcile it or work through that with God? And if so, how did that work?
Yeah, I think definitely. For me, it's, okay, this is truth, but this is my reality, and this is not matching up. So a lot of times our reality doesn't match up to truth, and that's where society is always changing things. What is true is always changing in society, but the Bible, that's one thing that through time will stay the same. So it's just going back to that and surrounding yourself with people who are going to build you up instead of tearing you down, and what you put in your mind. Over time, it becomes true. Mm-hmm.
How did that prepare you, those kind of habits and practices? Time in the Word, prayer we talked about was a part of your life. How did that prepare you for a year ago, maybe even before a year ago? Because take us to the surgery. Mm-hmm. You had a what's the name of the surgery?
Yeah, so a year ago I had this surgery. It was called selective dorsal rhizotomy, and or SDR for short. And what they do is they go into the back of your spinal cord and they test the nerves, in your spinal cord that are causing the most spasticity in your muscles. And the doctor will sever those nerves, and when that is done, that stops the signal going to the brain that's telling your muscles to constantly be in a tightened state. But that's just, I mean, it's a spinal surgery, so it's not just like something you're going to walk into. It's like going to the doctor to get a shot. It's something that requires a lot of research, really praying about it. I had researched it and talked to people like a year and a half before I had the surgery.
And of course, they present you with the risks
Yeah.
and the possible outcomes. How did you make your decision and say, I'm going to do it?
So I had gone for the consult with the doctor, and he was like, I highly recommend you do this, because if you don't, he's like, I've seen people and they don't have the surgery, and then 10, 15 years from now, you'll be in a wheelchair. And I knew that that's not what I wanted for my life. And after talking with this doctor, he had done 4,000 of these surgeries. And 4,000 of these surgeries that he's done on people, he's never had a single case of paralysis or anything severe like that. It's always just been improving. So I knew that that was the doctor that I was going to go to.
Were you scared?
I mean, yeah, surgery it's not fun.
Yeah.
But it's,
That was a year ago, 2 days from now.
Yeah.
What has your experience been? It was successful, and you're now gaining mobility and gaining strength. What have you been surprised about in the last year, where you've found yourself going, whoa?
So the biggest things for me, one of the most epic things about having the surgery and just how my body moves naturally, is my feet are finally flat on the ground when I walk. Before, I used to always be a toe walker, so I'd walk on my toes. And so just being able to walk and feel my feet flat is that never gets old. That's one of the most simplest joys, but it's awesome.
Yeah. But you're doing physical therapy
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah. Two times a week. My sessions are 2 hours long, but it's not like your traditional therapy. It's you do planks and push-ups, and they really push you to do, the best that you can be, everybody there.
When doctors always say, what's your scale of pain? Are you a 1 or a 10? Just on a day-to-day basis, do you feel pain on a day-to-day basis that you have to fight through?
Mm-hmm. It's constantly just always there, and the pain isn't from the surgery, or it's not saying that the surgery didn't help, but it's because I didn't have the surgery until much later in my life that the spasticity had already done damage to my body. So things are just always tight. It kind of just feels like my back is in a, just a low backache all the time. My hips are always tight. It's just uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's every day,
Mm-hmm.
every day. One of the things that struck me that I had never thought about is you talked about the supports that are in place for people who are navigating these challenges that are under 18. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like there's quite a bit of support for the community or from the community for that. Is that true?
There is. It's a lot of support and stuff is in place for children, and everybody wants to see, on the news, kids are learning how to walk and they're adorable and root them on, but what society forgets is, your disability doesn't disappear once you turn 18 or 21. But unfortunately, our society, a lot of resources stop when you become an adult.
Yeah.
They're basically goodbye, good luck.
Yeah. It's something that when we were talking, it just, again, taught me that I'm not mindful enough even when I vote, when I think about anything that we're doing, even Buddy Brewer, are we being thoughtful? Are we being mindful about the challenges that people are facing and how we can help, how we can provide support, no matter what community we're in? So there's things that we can do at a community level. What are some of the most powerful things that have and continue to make a difference for you in your life? Friends, family? What are some of the simple things and some of the things that maybe somebody even sitting in this room is somebody who has impacted you because they were willing to do this?
I mean, even my friends who helped me with the triathlon, that was huge. That was amazing. I mean, because like I said, growing up, I never gotten to play sports or do anything like that. But as far as day to day, just, the power of your words, hey, I'm thinking of you, I'm praying for you. How can I support you? And really saying how can I support you? And then following through with okay, I said I would support you. You gave me some ways that I can help you. I'm going to follow through.
I think that is the power in that is that we get to go in and out of these stories. But I can imagine that there's a night at 10 o'clock at night when you're facing a difficult day, just like we face difficult days, and you're alone in those moments. And it's so easy for us to forget. And so I think it's a powerful reminder that those little things, voices of encouragement cheering you on, they matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Teach us something about just perseverance in our faith, because I'm sure there's times where it has felt like stretched to the point where you don't know what to do. What do you do in those moments where you were like, God, I don't know if I can do this anymore?
You know, it's really just taking it one day at a time. And a lot of times, like, I'll get exasperated when I fall, you know, because it's usually like I'm trying to go somewhere, I got something to do. And I'm like, I don't have time for this, you know, I got to get on with my day. And then, like, I'll hear that still small voice that says, wait a minute, you do have time because I created this time. So with you and me together, we can do this.
How hard is it for you to fight that outer voice that says, no, give up, or that pushes back against that inner voice? And what have you learned about being able to hear that voice that's calling you forward and obey?
I mean, it definitely, you know, it's something that you have to be attuned to because the world and everything will try to push it out. But just being like intentional with the music that you're listening to, the people that you're surrounding yourself with, that is all helpful. And it's just, you know, like daily, like renewing your mind type thing, and just being aware of what you're putting into your life. And
yeah. How can we be more supportive of not just the CP community, but yeah, let's start there. What are some specific things that we can start thinking about, or we should start thinking about? I'm thinking about somebody in Seattle who's going to go back and they're a teacher, and tomorrow they're going to go back into their school, and they maybe haven't thought of some things. What are some questions we should be asking, or some ways that we should be starting to think differently?
yeah, and this would just go for anybody with any type of disability. I would even say, you know, start at home. Like, start teaching your kids that different is normal, different's okay. Point out, like, how cool is it that we all move and talk and think differently. It's not something where you have to shush your kids away from and look the other way. You know, make it a part of normal dialogue. It's okay. You can ask questions. You know, church, like, if somebody has a special need, like, whatever you do, don't stare at that family, don't stare at that child. Like, if someone has a greater support need, you better find someone to come in so that child can participate in the activities, the Sunday schools, whatever. You know, they have a right to be a part of the church, and that's what the church is supposed to do, build one another up. As far as, like, schools and communities, look for ways, like, how can you be supportive of your students? You know, is it like, do I give them extra time on tests, read the questions to them, make it so that they can, you know, have easy access in and out of their desk to the door. Things like, if they're in PE and maybe they can't run the whole track mile, don't make them run the basketball court by themselves. Like, let a friend go with them. You know, don't make them feel standoutish. Or inclusion.
This is something that came up in our lunch as well. The idea that you felt very much like an outsider so many different times, and to be included was joy. It just brought so much joy to be a part of whatever was happening. Yeah. What have you learned about God? If you could go back and say, this experience, you know, the road that I have walked, I have seen God maybe in a way that surprised me, or I didn't know. What have you learned about God and his character and who he is?
He is faithful. With him, if you put your trust in him, like, life is not always easy, but you can get through the day, you know, and one day at a time. That's all you have to do. He's faithful. He's always with us. He wants to root us on. He doesn't want to tear us down, you know? Yeah. And we're not supposed to do everything on our own. The reason why You know, everybody has a struggle. Mine is just more noticeable. But the reason we have this struggle is so that we can rely on him. If we did everything in our own power, like why are we here? What's the purpose?
Yeah. Speaking of purpose, what's next for you? You've done a triathlon. You tackled college. You are doing your career and navigating all of the things in a city life. What are you praying about right now? What are you thinking about that God might be pulling you towards or wanting to teach you, show you?
You know, I think he's just like wanting to use my experiences to help others. You know, like you've been through these trials, you've come out on the other side. Like I'm preparing you to be able to use these struggles to help others, or your challenges, you've gone through them. Now I'm just waiting to hear from him. Like, how is he going to use these?
Yeah. You told me that there were times that you had to wrestle through those thoughts of, does my life matter? Would it be better if I wasn't here because I wouldn't be a burden on people? And that those are things that you have wrestled through. To the young person, especially, go back in time to the 7, 8, 10, 12-year-old person who has yet to do their triathlon and tackle college. Talk directly to them right now and just speak some life into that young person or to that person who, go back in time and be a cheerleader. What do you want to say to that person?
You know, hang in there. This is your right now. It's not forever. I promise. People aren't jerks forever. Things will get better.
Yeah. Who should you have in your corner? You have some incredible friends, incredible family. Has that just happened by providence, or have you been intentional about reaching out and asking people to be in your corner? How does that work?
Yeah, no, it has to start within yourself, and healing has to take place within yourself, and you have to realize like who your identity is in. And then once you have that, you're, you know, solid in your identity and you're comfortable, you can start, or it's easier to start to form relationships. You realize that people are for you and that there are genuine people out there, but it's not something that you're just gonna sit around and wait for. You know, you have to do work on yourself, and you have to really work through those struggles and wrestle with the things that are hard and work on those, and then work on yourself.
Yeah. They're going to tell me I'm running out of time, so I have to be mindful of that. I can feel Jerome, our producer, is behind me. But as we kind of round the corner and we open it up for some questions, here's what I want to say back to you. Thank you for putting on display the life and beauty of the gospel, because we see it. I saw it's striking in a world that is divided, in a world that is hopeless at times, in a world that does not believe that there is help outside of ourself. You just walk this beautiful path showing that God is with you and that he is faithful, and there's an honesty to your faith. And that's why I love this conversation, because you don't have a pain-free life. This is every single day, and yet God is with you in that. And because of that, I think you've already changed my life. I think you've changed everybody's life in this room. And for that, we just want to say thank you. So if you join me and say thank you to Carrie.
Thank you.